Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that you had a very gentle holiday season. This is the time of year where things start getting really hard for me. We lost Jasmine in March, but the chain of events of finding out more about her diagnosis and meeting with a specialist and all of those things, they started right at Christmas time. So basically, Christmas starts the hard time, and it pretty much stays that way until I reach the date we lost her. And I know the holiday season is hard for a lot of you as well. So just know that I'm always here if you need somebody to talk to. You can always feel free to reach out to me through any of my social media accounts, which are all under Journey for Jasmine, or you can always email me at sarah@journeyforjasmine.com. Today, the episode is all about termination for medical reasons, also commonly known as TFMR. In this episode, Allyson, Kori, and Gaby share their experience going through TFMR and what they want you to know about the experience. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Allyson, Kori, and Gaby, and we are doing an episode that is talking about termination for medical reasons, which is also known as TFMR. So I am going to let them do an introduction about themselves. Allyson, do you mind going first?
Sure thing. So my name is Allyson. I am 37 years old. I live in Pennsylvania. My TFMR was 15 weeks ago. So on September 11th of 2024. And things I like to do, I'm actually a mental health therapist by trade. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I'm a furry dog mom. I like to do a lot with him, or at least he makes me do a lot with him, even in the freezing cold right now. For fun, I like to do makeup artistry stuff as well. So Halloween's a big jam for me.
That sounds really interesting. I've never been good at the whole makeup side of things, but I'm always impressed by people who are good at that. So, Kori, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Kori. I am 33 years old and I live in London, Ontario, Canada. If you're not sure where that is, the closest landmark is Toronto. We're quite close to Toronto. My TFMR was back in March of 2022, and we lost our son at 22 weeks. His name was Stanley. And things that I like to do for fun. It's tough. I do have one living child right now, so he's 12 months old. That keeps me very busy. So I'm like just getting into being able to do things I like again. So it's honestly hard to remember, but I like playing badminton and volleyball and trying out new sorts of crafts. I really enjoy crafting.
I'm I'm not big on the crafts either. I end up being the more Pinterest fails most of the time. So yeah, no, I'm impressed by people who are good at that. So Gaby, do you mind sharing a little?
Yeah, I'm Gaby. I just turned 40 in September. And I live in Barrie, Ontario. It's like an hour and a half away from Toronto. My TFMR was in 2017, like 7 years ago in March. We lost our daughter. Her name was Emma at 17 weeks. Things I enjoy doing is I have a 6-year-old son right now, so he keeps us really busy. And for like fun, I like baking, and right now I'm into yoga a lot, so I try to do it every day. And yeah, like watching TV, reading books, stuff like that. Yeah.
What kind of books do you like to read?
It's usually like short novels or like something light.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand that. Sometimes it's nice to just escape for a little bit, but I don't always have a lot of time to read like long things.
Yeah.
The first question I just wanted to ask you all is to just tell a little bit more detail about your termination, like what your baby was diagnosed with and kind of how that process or that decision was made. So Allyson, do you mind sharing a little?
Yeah. So we lost my daughter Kira. Her name is actually Kira Zena because we joked a little bit about her middle name being Zena because she was a fighter throughout. At 14 weeks at our scan, we found out that she had a giant omphalocele, which is where the organs start kind of growing outside of your body in a sac. And that was obviously shocking to begin with. That led to us being referred to one of the best children's hospitals in the nation in Philadelphia. And we hit about 20 weeks there. We also found out that she had kyphosis, which is curvature of the spine, probably because of the omphalocele. By the time we hit 20 weeks, the majority of her organs outside of her heart and lungs were growing in the sac. So the giant omphalocele was playing a big part in moving some other things in her body too. So we're thinking that's where the kyphosis came from. We're currently waiting on genetic things to come back because we did exome screening afterwards. We did other screening along the way. I had a CVS and an amnio because with omphalocele, sometimes there are genetic links, usually with the smaller ones, from what I've been told. And she was cleared at least for that part, but we're just doing our due diligence at this point to really see if there is anything going on because Kira was my first child. So that's what has happened with her diagnosis. And did you want me to go more into detail regarding how I got to the TFMR or
Yeah, if
just
you don't mind sharing, just, were there other options presented to you, or, did you felt like you were being pushed in that direction? Like, how did that come about?
I did a lot of research because we were lucky to find out relatively early about the omphalocele. So I joined Facebook groups. There's a big one called Born Able that has different diagnosis subgroups. So I was in the omphalocele group from the diagnosis at 14 weeks to 20 weeks. When I got to the children's hospital, they were supportive, but at the same time, very direct about this is not a good diagnosis. And so I did further research, kind of talked to the omphalocele group to see if anyone else had experienced similar diagnosis and had success. So there was a lot there in terms of getting to that point. The surgeon, I really appreciate. He was pretty direct with me. His closing kind of statements to me were ultimately you can make your choice, but I'm very concerned for your daughter due to how the organs were growing outside of her body and that curvature of the spine. It was very likely that if she would have survived delivery, her lungs wouldn't have been big enough for her to breathe on her own, which would also lead to cognitive issues down the line. There would have been so many surgeries. So we decided to get to the point of we didn't want to see her suffer and got to the decision of the TFMR.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Kori, do you mind sharing a little bit about your experience?
Um, so like I had mentioned kind of in my intro, so we lost our son Stanley. He was also my first child. We kind of similar to Allyson, we did find out our diagnosis maybe a wee bit earlier than someone else might have, but he was diagnosed with a heart defect. So my husband was also born with a heart defect that he needed surgery for when he was 3 years old. So it was sort of on their radar that we maybe had a slightly higher chance of having a child with a heart defect. But they still really kind of reassured us, it's a 1% chance more than any other person. There's no real reason. Heart defects aren't often genetic. So we had gone to our anatomy scan at around 20 weeks. Everything looked great. The baby was doing awesome. And later that week, we had an echo scheduled to look specifically at the baby's heart. And in between those kind of 3 days between the two ultrasounds, on the anatomy scan, they did find something looked abnormal. And so they then were like, okay, the echo is now even more so required because we do think we're seeing something. So it was 20 weeks and a handful of days we went for that echo, and they diagnosed our son with hypoplastic left heart syndrome and anomalous pulmonary veins. So essentially, what that meant for him is that the bottom half of his heart didn't form, and the veins that bring blood back to your heart weren't attached to anything. And so he had sort of, in his little body, finagled a way to get blood back that worked well. He was still inside me, but once he would be born, that wouldn't function anymore. So we later that week, thankfully, they kind of got those appointments really quickly for us, because I'm sure you can relate. Once you get any sort of news, it feels like forever to wait, even if it's just a couple hours to get a call from your doctor. So thankfully, they did kind of expedite that process for us. And we met with someone at the Children's Hospital in London, and they did even more scans to really confirm the diagnosis. And in terms of options that we were given, we were told that we could carry full term and deliver, and there would be many, many surgeries in our son's life that all ultimately would be deemed palliative. So even if he did survive birth and he did survive those first few surgeries, the outlook for his life was not going to be great in terms of quality. And so we were presented with the choice to terminate the pregnancy. And thankfully, we didn't feel rushed in that decision. So at this point now, I'm maybe like 21 weeks pregnant. And in my province, you are able to terminate all the way up until 24 without things starting to get a little bit more complicated. So our doctor was really great in telling us, you can go home, you can do more research, really make sure that you feel confident in this decision. But ultimately, we felt like all of the options still just led to the death of our child. And so it was in our hands to decide, how do we want to let our son die? And for us, what we felt most comfortable with was to induce the pregnancy so that he would pass during the delivery. And we felt that was going to be the most peaceful choice for him.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Gaby, do you mind sharing a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, so I think we actually found that I was pregnant like a little bit late. I would say like 8 weeks, just because my period was always off and on, and like we were trying, but we weren't really trying, if you know what I mean. So we finally got like my family doctor to see me. She did a like blood test, and it came back positive. And then that she did the first ultrasound just to confirm there was a heartbeat and everything looked good. But then within a week, for whatever reason, they took me in the OBGYN. And so she was the one catching the genetic defect by the 12-week scan. So when I first went to the ultrasound, like the lady took a lot of time, like doing the ultrasound. So, but because it was our first child, we didn't really read much into it. But then the next day, the doctor called me to see her right away. Like she said, kind of like come first thing in the morning if you can. So I knew like something was wrong. So when she called us to her office, she said they saw some defects in her whole body, and it could be something that it ended up being like it's called Turner syndrome. It's a genetic defect that apparently is only for girls. So that's how we knew she was a girl from the beginning. And she did further testing, like a lab test, and she rushed me to another ultrasound on that same week. And we saw like a specialist, like a high risk doctor in the same hospital. And they were pretty good, like giving us all like information, like firsthand. And same, like we were in rush, as because I was like by that time I was like 14 weeks. So they kind of say you have plenty of options right now. So think about it, how you want to go for it. Because they did say like, I mean, the pregnancy looked normal, and she was still having like a heartbeat, and everything looked okay. Like in those first ultrasounds, I guess they just got it. but they told me like the chances of you getting to full term are minimal. And if so, we don't know if she's gonna survive like the delivery. So like, I don't know, after like 4 or 5 appointments with the high risk OBGYN, he kind of said, like at the very last ultrasound, they said her heartbeat started going like faster, and there was some like water in her lungs already. So that afternoon we were sent home, and like kind of like not rushing, but more telling us, you are at that point, like maybe you should decide, because otherwise it is going to be like you're going to have to come back like kind of rushing because it's happening already, or you can decide. So I think it was like a weekend. So we took it to ourselves to like see what we were going to do. And like, I mean, knowing that probably we wouldn't be getting to like the 40 weeks anyway, we decided to terminate the pregnancy. And I ended up going to another hospital in downtown Toronto, at Mount Sinai, which is like, they have very good care for like those kind of scenarios. Yeah, they saw me twice. Like the first time they kind of induced it, they sent me home, and then I was looked at the next morning. Yeah, and that was back in 2017. So she would have been 7 by now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So I know that termination for medical reasons is a type of loss that sometimes faces a lot of stigma. Is that something that any of you have run across?
I can answer for myself. I would say I haven't experienced too much direct stigma. I know that there can be, you feel a little bit left out in things, that it's either you're part of the abortion community or you're part of the miscarriage community. And sometimes it doesn't feel like there's room for both. So we have a sort of like a free therapy type thing that you can access, and a like network for parents that have lost children. And I remember looking into that, and it was like 2 support groups, either miscarriage, or like miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. And it was like, well, I don't really fit into any one of those. There's a bit of a crossover. And what the first time soon after the loss that I realized that it's not super well recognized as being included in a lot of those conversations. And even just recently, I had somebody tell me that, so when my son was born, it was a 50-50 chance that he would be born alive. And if he was alive, he would die shortly after birth. And he did not survive the delivery. So I will often say that he was born still, and that it was like an induced stillbirth. Like, I will use the term stillbirth because that's what happened. And I had somebody recently kind of say like, oh, like, but it wasn't an actual stillbirth. Like, oh my gosh, like I thought you had like an actual stillbirth. And that was really
Like,
offensive to
what?
me. Yeah, it actually really bothered me, because I think, people can think whatever they want to think about it, but I think you really need to pay attention to the language that the person that went through it is using, and just like model that language. So if I'm going to say that I had a stillbirth, then you like, don't diminish that or say that it was any less because it happened earlier in the pregnancy.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I can kind of like remember, like my background is Mexican, so we're very Catholic, right? So I remember like back then we didn't even tell anyone, because we were not even at the point of like announcing the pregnancy yet. And so we had to tell our parents, but like I think I remember at first we wanted to keep it secret because I didn't know how people would react of like they knowing the whole story. Luckily, like no one said anything at the time, but like Kori was saying, like I felt very like isolated, because like I knew of a friend who had a miscarriage, like early miscarriage, but I didn't know anyone who had to actually take a decision, right? So I was like, I can't tell people that I had to actually say something, right? Like to the doctor, like, yeah, terminate the pregnancy, right? So now it's been a while, so I know there's more resources and like information, but I feel like it's still something that people don't really want to talk about. And I think I kind of in my mind, I blocked a comment that, and then I realized one of my friends, actually like a good friend, I guess she didn't know what to say when I kind of told her the story. And it had just been like 2 days after the surgery I had. And she did made a comment saying like, well, this is not accepted in our religion.
Well, I
So then
think
like,
that's helpful. Thank you.
yeah, so then like years later, I kind of unblocked that comment. And I was like, that was so rude. Like I would never say to anyone, even if I thought about it. Like if I'm crying telling you, I wouldn't say that, right? So yeah.
And people can just be so insensitive about things. And I feel like it's one of those things that you don't understand what it's like to go through a loss until you've been through it. And you definitely don't understand, what it's like to have to make that decision because it's not a decision that's made lightly by anybody.
Mhm.
I agree. Like, I feel like kind of how I've come to terms with it, I guess, is the sense of like I didn't really see it as a choice. Thought of it more of like when you see loved ones that are on life support and you're doing this for like the better good, and it's more so like the lesser of two evils kind of choice. And I remember sitting and thinking like I wish she would just kind of pass on her own so I didn't have to make this decision. And one of my friends was like, well, this is the biggest decision you will ever have to make as a mom. And I agree with Kori and Gaby, like that just isolation factor, that it doesn't seem to be like a particular space where a lot of people have been, which I'm thankful for. I'm glad not many people have had to experience this, but I know it was really heartbreaking for me. The first place I went to seek help was a clinic, and I actually got denied from the clinic, which led to a whole lot of trauma to get to the D&E part because I was 23 weeks when we had the D&E, and in Pennsylvania it's 24 weeks, which is technically 23 weeks and 6 days. So the denial from the clinic led to more waiting and concern and stress on if we would get help in time. But at the clinic, they were doing their job, and just I was crying and explaining that it was a termination for medical reasons. Talked about it in the intake, but they were still really questioning like, are you sure you want to do this? Is anybody pressuring you to make you do this? Which I appreciate that they're looking out for women in that sense. But it's also like I've voiced to you already that this is already a super difficult decision and why I'm making these decisions. So the pressing, in a sense, because of where I was really difficult to manage at the time.
So I'm not sure what the rules are exactly in Canada, but are you up against any particular week deadline where you live?
So I can speak to at least in 2022, which the laws haven't really changed in Ontario since then. So I looked it up this morning too because I wanted to be correct in it. So it's 24 weeks and 6 days that you can have a surgical abortion, like a D&E. And what our doctor had said to us is that at 24 weeks, things can get kind of tricky if you want to have the medically induced termination. So that's what I did. So labor was induced and we delivered Stanley. And our doctor sort of said at 24 weeks, if the baby's born alive, then the NICU team is required to attempt resuscitation. And that was a little bit surprising to me. If we knew that we didn't want to offer life-saving care, you kind of don't have a choice. At least that's what the information that was presented to us. And then beyond, I think around 26 weeks, if you want to terminate, then it needs to go to like a panel of people who are going to review your case, which we really didn't want to get to that point where somebody else would make that decision for us. However, some doctors will provide an injection that stops the baby's heart before you're induced to kind of tiptoe around that situation so that they kind of ensure that the baby has already passed when you deliver. But at least those are the rules that we were kind of given in the explanation when we were deciding to terminate.
So if you could tell anybody, something that you want them to know about having to go through this, what would that be?
I feel like a couple of things, like if you're looking at different ideas around it, like emotionally, I would say there's no way to prepare as somebody with a clinical background and is a therapist and tells people how to manage their emotions. Managing my own emotions through this whole process has been quite the journey. And it's something I'm still doing due to kind of gaining access and the procedure in itself. Like I'm currently managing PTSD symptoms, and it's hard to do it on your own. Like reach out to people, reach out to professional help in that space and know that it's okay if you completely fall apart. I know I beat myself up about it for a little bit when I didn't get out of bed some days, but in reality, that's what I needed. And a lot of body care. I do somatic yoga because it is a physical trauma to ourselves. And also to talk a little logistics, at least I know in the States, it's hard to wrap your head around like how much this costs sometimes, and the point of like I have to not only sign off to end my baby's life, but now I need to pay so much money to do so. So now it's kind of like the aftermath of things of make sure that if you have a support system to utilize them. That's what people are there for. It is really hard even when you do have all your ducks in a row and feel like you were at the top of your mental health or top of your finances or top of your social life. Everything changes. And that doesn't necessarily mean for the bad, because I feel like the passing of Kira is going to lead me in a different direction, especially as a therapist. I hope to do more research and get more certifications to help people that have gone through what I've gone through, because there aren't a lot of people that are skilled to know.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, I would say like at the time I was going to the after the pregnancy, I was going to the naturopath and she was very compassionate. So I remember she saying something like, you are a mom the moment you conceive. So it doesn't matter how early the loss for whatever reason was. So like keep in mind that doesn't matter. You are a mom, right? So and what you did was like the biggest decision probably in your life, like out of love for your baby, right? So I think that was very key for me hearing that because I was feeling guilty afterwards, like and then also like Allyson mentioned, like take care of yourself, like don't care about anything else. Because I remember at the time after everything happened, my one of my friends got pregnant, my sister-in-law got pregnant, and I was like dealing with like all the feelings on top of like thinking about going to the baby shower and stuff like that. And then I realized, why am I caring about like other people's feelings, like when I'm feeling like crap, right? Like so you need to take care of yourself and like find help because yeah, like the trauma after still sometimes carries with me right now, like going to like doing ultrasounds for like different reasons, or like when I got pregnant the second time, like all those tests, my anxiety was so high in the whole pregnancy, right? Like the second time. So you have to take care of yourself.
Overall, did you feel like you received good support from family and friends and also from your medical team during the whole process?
I think so. Majority of them, they were very supportive. And like luckily on the second pregnancy, I had the same OBGYN. So she was very mindful and of like everything that happened to us. So she was very open to like me doing extra tests and like helping with like our like everything, right? The whole process. So I think we were very lucky that way. And like the process went smoothly, I would say, as much as it could. So yeah.
What about you, Kori and Allyson? Do you feel like you overall received good support on both ends?
Yeah, And I might just jump back, Sarah, to your other question about just kind of like what you want people to kind of know about going through a TFMR. So Gaby and Allyson really said a lot of the thoughts that I had, and especially Gaby mentioned that the decision that you make is the hardest decision you'll make as a parent. It's for a lot of us the first parenting decision we have to make, and it's a decision that's made in love. And I have shared with a lot of people that have crossed my paths that if ever you are encountering somebody who has experienced a diagnosis or a termination, or they decide to continue the pregnancy, or they terminate in one way versus the other, just to remember that that person made that choice with so much love, and to just not pass judgment on what that parent did. And you might think that it's something that you would never do, but unless you've been faced with that decision, you really can't put yourself into those shoes unless you've been through it. And to anyone who is going through it right now, like, I don't want to be this voice of like toxic positivity, but it does get easier to move forward, and the grief does get lighter, and it shows up when you don't expect it. But to anyone who's like fresh in their loss, it does get better. And like Allyson said, like, find the resources, take care of yourself.
I want to piggyback off you, Kori, too. The sense of grief. I always talk to my clients, and even in myself, like if you would have asked me 3 months ago, like a week after it happened, if I would be where I'm at today, I would not believe you in the sense, because in reality, like grief in itself doesn't get smaller. We just evolve as people and we cope differently. I've done so much in the small amount of time to commemorate her. We have like a stained glass kind of thing that we got off of Etsy that has her name and is like a little girl on a moon, like in the stars kind of deal. I have like a necklace for her. I wear shirts that I talk to people about, like being a lost mom. And the community has been so supportive. Like, not only do I have the most amazing fiance who has literally just done so much to support me, but I've had like great family members as well. Even though, like, in reality, people checking in on you dwindles because their life continues, and this is something that has affected us. So there's like this stunting and moving forward sometimes, but it's nice to have people that still kind of like bring her up or check in or do certain things. I will say as well, Sarah, because I know you mentioned like support in like medical care at the clinic. I did not feel supported whatsoever, especially because I got denied. But when we found the surgical center that ended up being the provider for the TFMR, they were the most amazing human beings. Like, and there were other issues that happened on like the day of the surgery, unfortunately, that like was technical issues and all this stuff. So there was a lot of stress around it. And with the D&E, it's a 2-day process. And they were like holding my hand through the first day to do the first part of the procedure and checking in on us frequently. At the clinic, my fiance wasn't even allowed to be in the building with me versus at the surgical center. He was with me as soon as we checked in until I went back for the procedure, and then he was there like as soon as I woke up. So finding a great team medically too, I think makes all the difference as well.
I can kind of talk about my medical team too. Allyson, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. Like you kind of mentioned, just like it adds to the trauma, and any of those little things just they become huge. Like I feel like we just lose the ability to cope with things like that. And so in my experience, I was lucky that I was with a midwife, and diagnosis, she had to refer me to a maternal fetal medicine specialist. And she kind of has her like go-to guy that she would refer people to. And this physician is married to a midwife. And I just found that I think impacts how he treats his patients, that he just sort of understands kind of the whole, like the person as a whole a little bit better. And he is somebody who you could tell like very clearly wants to advocate for the rights of a pregnant person and their right to choose. And one of the things he said to me when we told him that we would like to terminate, he said, I think that's a very compassionate choice. And I don't want that to come off as anyone who continues the pregnancy is not choosing compassion. That's not the point of it. But just in that moment, him telling us that the decision we were making was compassionate just was really something that I needed to hear. Because like Gaby mentioned, I felt a lot of guilt. I also grew up Catholic. I'm not anymore, but that Catholic guilt, it follows you for your whole life. And having somebody tell me that that was a kind choice to make for my child really impacted me. And the only like time pressure that I felt even the littlest bit was this physician wasn't going to be on for delivery again for 7 days. And so he said, if you would like it to be me, we can schedule your induction for 7 days from now. And I, as soon as I met him, knew that it was like, this is the person that I want to deliver my child. And kind of fast forward a little bit, after we did deliver, we had a celebration of life a few months later, and he attended that. And it just really, it sat with me that like both him and my midwife attended that. They cared about me as a person, they cared about our son, and this was more than just another day on the job for them.
I think that's amazing because you're right. So many medical professionals just don't go that extra mile and, attend the service and do things like that. So I think it's so amazing when you hear the stories of all the good doctors. So did anybody have any particular resources that they found helpful either right after or later about TFMR?
It's not specific, but in the clinic, I mean the hospital, we went through the whole process before we were referred to have the surgery. It's Sunnybrook. So they refer me right away to a program they have that it's called PAIL. It's pregnancy and infant loss. So we were doing group therapy with them for a while. Like after we found out, like we were kind of feeling a little bit better, and like we figure maybe just now do it by ourselves. We started doing like couples therapy through a different resource, but I found that that group helped us a lot to like understand that we were not alone, because there were a lot of families going through it. And then they do events to fundraise money, and they are educating like the hospitals around Ontario. And they do like it's called the butterfly release. I believe it's in May, because we attended that one after. They basically, you share your story, they have like in the park, and then you buy the butterflies and you release them. So that was very helpful for us.
If I can just kind of piggyback off of that. So we were also given some pamphlets for the PAIL network that Gaby was mentioning. And that was actually the group that I found was a little bit like exclusive in the way that they had their like group therapy sessions set up, that it was sort of like miscarriage families go here and abortion families go here. And I didn't actually access any of their services, so I can't attest to, had we actually gone. But that just putting those labels on it was enough for me to feel like I don't know if this will be a safe space for me. And I love hearing that, Gaby, it was really positive for you. And I think it just sort of, I like the point that I kind of want to put out there is that it's okay if you like look into something and it doesn't feel right and you go a different route. And hearing about one person who did have a good experience with that is amazing. And if somebody else, it wasn't the right thing, like that's okay too. And I ended up accessing some individual therapy, and we tried couples therapy also and struggled to find a good therapist. And one of the things that I think can be challenging after a loss is finding intimacy again with your partner. And so that was one of the reasons that we wanted to go to couples therapy. And our therapist suggested cleaning our bedroom and lighting a candle. And we just had to like laugh at it that it's like, oh, no, no, no. The issues are much deeper than just like putting away laundry and lighting a candle.
I'm like super laughing because I am a couples therapist and that's awful.
So
But
needless to say, we did not continue sessions with that particular one. But it, I think sometimes it takes a little bit to find the right therapist for you. But yes, that advice I did not find to be overly helpful. It felt like something my mom might say, like, well, is your laundry put away? Are there dirty socks out? Like,
Yeah.
You're like, yes, and that solves all of my problems.
of course, if they would just put their socks in the hamper, it'd be fine. It totally takes it all away. And hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, oh my God, the states are so far behind. Because there's not a lot of support. Like there was no pamphlet or anything that I got. Thankfully, as a therapist, I was already in therapy for a while. I've had my therapist for years just to kind of keep me in check every so often, and she was great to just be like, oh, like even when we found out we were pregnant, she was super excited, and then when everything was going on, like we increased sessions and stuff. So I agree, like you need to find the person that you connect with and feel the best with. And that also drives me in the sense of, like I said before, is hoping to kind of close that gap a little bit and do something on the therapy side to try to help more people. Because even with big like hospital systems, there's not a lot of support, and you really have to like find the needle in the haystack, which can be so difficult when you are already so flooded with emotions. But finding that person that can kind of just like ground you back to space and apply that clinical stuff and, give hopefully better advice than putting socks in a hamper would be beneficial.
Allyson, it's interesting that you mentioned feeling like how your loss experience is maybe shaping the direction you want to go in, and that you now see some gaps that you didn't see before. And one of the things that I found was I too, like both of you, enjoy yoga. And so I was given a maternity leave and didn't have a baby. So I was like, okay, what do I do? So I got my yoga certification in that time and found that there was no place for me to go as a childless mother who had just had a vaginal delivery and also needed to heal my body in the same way that any other mom would. And that's one gap that I would love to
Yeah.
fill, at least in my city, that there's no real postpartum yoga classes that aren't like mom and baby classes.
That's so interesting. One, also the fact that maybe this is a Canada thing, that you get maternity leave after
Yeah, I
this.
did not get that either after my stillbirth.
I was like,
Yeah. Let me tell you, there was some fighting to get it and get the leave like approved through work also. But if you experience your loss after 20 weeks,
20
then
weeks.
you will get your 15 weeks maternity. But I don't know if that is just for a vaginal delivery or if you have the D&E. If they still, I don't know exactly those, but in my case, I did qualify to at least get 15 weeks off work.
that's amazing. And I'm
Yeah.
also kind of going with your yoga flow here because that has been my thought process too with somatic yoga. It's not super prevalent in our area, and it has helped with a lot of the recovery from the trauma in myself. And I've been contemplating the same thing of like, hey, maybe I wanted to be like a yoga instructor now.
I'll send you the place that I did my learning. It was all online. I can offline message you, send it to
Definitely. I'm definitely into that.
you.
Now I'm over here like I wanna do this.
I'll send it to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, TFMR Yoga Collective.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that any of you want to share or add?
I might share just like kind of the part two of my story. So like I mentioned, we do have a living son, and Gaby, I know you mentioned too, it was very nerve-wracking going through
Yeah.
another pregnancy after a loss. And at 14 weeks, we were sent to Mount Sinai, where you
Oh.
delivered Gaby, and they did heart testing on our son, knowing that, okay, like the dad has a heart defect, a brother has a heart defect, there's now like a decent chance that this baby would. And we were told though that, like, but probably not, but small percentage. And we got another heart diagnosis with that baby. And it was just a really like interesting and complicated decision to be faced with a second time around. And it was a different diagnosis that had a better outlook on life, but it was really hard to decide not to terminate that pregnancy. And it really created more work for me in therapy and everything to come to terms with the fact that Stanley's diagnosis was different. This is a completely different pregnancy. And just because you terminated one for medical reasons doesn't mean you have to terminate another one. And it doesn't mean that one child was more deserving of life or another, but I feel like once you've gone through this loss, like you carry it so close to you in everything else. And if you do have future pregnancies, like it's just, as much as you try to remember, okay, this is a different pregnancy, like how can you not think back to what you've been through and your previous TFMR? So that's just like a little piece of my story. And my son has had his surgeries. He's doing fine now, but it's forced us to be in the heart community, where we have also met other families who had a similar diagnosis to Stanley and their kids are living. And it's hard. It feels like we're almost being faced with the other side of that decision. And it's like a constant like self-talk for me to say, like, okay, Stanley's diagnosis was different. They deemed it incompatible with life. Surgery wasn't a life-saving option. But I feel like it follows you everywhere. And there's things that you don't realize it, but it'll trigger you and kind of send you right back to those emotions and kind of some of those intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, I would add to that, like my son is 6 right now, and sometimes it's not related at all. Like he was fine from the beginning. Like we did have to go through a cardiac doctor just because I was born with a congenital heart murmur. It's never given me any issues, but given our history with the other pregnancy, we kind of like, for our own sake, we did this with my son. He's fine. He's 6, but there's still some like dates here and there, or like milestones he's getting into that reminds me all the time of like she would have been 7, like she could have been in 2nd grade right now, like, and it's tough, right? So it's always gonna be there, and like I'm still going through therapy right now because like there's triggers everywhere, right? So in the family, like we all, like my husband and I, we have only nephews, so she would have been the only girl, right, in both families. So it does carry with you constantly, and it can trigger you out of nowhere. But I mean, as you said, grief is like it's not linear, right? It goes up and down, and it will be with you, but you just keep on going, I guess.
You do, even when you don't want to, sometimes in the sense
Yeah.
of like it feels impossible, but it's one step at a time. And oh, Gabby, I really connected to you because my daughter was gonna be the only girl too. And like I'm kind of a big deal because I'm the only girl in the family. So it was like a following in the footsteps, and she was gonna be my parents' first grandchild and like the only girl on my fiance's side as well. And you never know what's gonna happen. I think it's that sense of really just allowing yourself to be changed by this and it to be okay. I know some people have reached out and been like, oh, like I miss this about you, I miss that about you. I'm like, well, some things have really changed, and I'm also still really raw to it because it hasn't been far from it. But anniversaries, dates, like holidays, I know respectfully this year for the holidays, I've definitely taken a step back, or we've used, if you haven't noticed, some of our dark humor. to cope because Kira was going to be delivered around this time because she was going to be early, even though her due date was January 8th of next year. So there's a lot to consider when these hot button items happen. Like, okay, it's okay to not attend all the holiday things, or if people get bothered, whatever, that's their problem. Like, taking care of yourself. And I joke with my therapist friends at this point. I'm like, I can give all the advice in the world, I can give all the resources, but when it came to me, I gave myself a hard time for needing that space and going through this. It has shown me that really taking care of yourself and focusing on what you need is priority. And I'm excited to hear that both you, Gaby, and Kori have gone on to have another child afterwards, because I mean, we're at a space where we had Kira just not trying kind of deal, and in the first month of not trying, so we're back at, like, we just want to get ourselves back, and if it happens, it happens. Like, allowing yourself to reconnect with your person and also just de-stress from the space hopefully helps out with some of the anxiety, at least in the beginning.
So if any of you are open to connecting on social media, do you want to share your information?
I can start. So on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, all of those good things, you can find me at It's Getting Mom in Here. I share a lot of my story with Stanley and our experience with Heart Baby. And I also have a podcast that you can find wherever you get your podcasts, also by the same name, It's Getting Mom in Here.
I'm really only on Instagram. I have not posted these yet, but I have started to, well, I did start from like day one after my TFMR to do some TikToks around like raw reactions and processing and stuff like that. Will that ever make it to TikTok? Not sure. But if you'd like to connect, at least on Instagram, my handle is authentically Allyson, Allyson.
I'm only on Instagram too, and I really don't share much, like not even of like right now. But my name is Gaby Sap Set, and yeah, I'm happy to connect. I just hit follow you in your page, Kori.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on today and sharing your stories and your experience.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for giving us a platform to share. It's been really lovely getting to chat with everyone.
It really has,
Yes,
because even in this platform, like, here's two other people that I didn't know that went through the same experience as me. And it's nice to have that connection and space. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your experience with us. I thought Kori brought up an interesting point that so much of the loss world is centered around either miscarriage and stillbirth or the abortion world. There isn't always space, especially for other types of loss, and especially for TFMR parents. But there are more of these parents out there than many think. It's just a type of loss that's more silenced, or some people are just more afraid to talk about it. In fact, some of my top episodes on this podcast are the stories of those who are sharing about their TFMR experience. People want to hear the stories to know they aren't alone, to know that they are not the only one that had to go through this type of heartbreak, to have other people that understand they were making the most compassionate choice they could for their child. As always, just remember, we truly never know what we would do or what it's really like to be in this situation until we are the one in their shoes. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more lost and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.